Hey, this is an instructional video to show you how to solve one-step equations that involve multiplication and division. So we know multiplication and division are inverse operations of one another. So let's jump in and try one out. So I have 7x equals 21. So here's my variable x. What is being done to my variable? We have this 7 in front of it, and 7 is called the coefficient. So what a coefficient tells us is it's the multiplier of x. How many of x are there? What is it being multiplied by? So this is really the same as saying 7 times x equals 21. So multiplication is what's going on between these two. So if x is being multiplied by 7, we want to get rid of that multiplied by 7 so that we can have x by itself. What is the inverse of multiplying by 7? The inverse would be dividing by 7. So by dividing by 7, you'll notice we actually have like a 7 over 7x here. And we know that 7 over 7 is really just equal to 1. So it's really like we're saying we have 1x. So that's why we divide to kind of neutralize this multiply by 7. By dividing by 7, we end up with just 1. And they cancel out. And we don't need to write 1x because anytime we have a coefficient of 1, we just usually leave it out. Now, because this is an equation, we can't forget if we divide by 7 on one side, we have to divide by 7 on the other side. So 21 divided by 7, if we simplify, we get an answer of 3. Okay, so in this equation, we had to divide both sides by 7 in order to get rid of that coefficient of 7, and then we ended up with an answer of 3. So we can test or verify our answer by taking my original equation, and I can substitute my answer in for x. If x equals 3, we're going to put a 3 in here instead. So now it's 7 times 3 instead of 7 times x. And does that equal 21? Yes, it does. So we know that our answer of x equals 3 is correct. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try negative 20 equals 4x. So in this case, our x is on the right-hand side of the equation, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter what side it's on as long as we get it all by itself. So right now I have an x and it's being multiplied by 4 because we have that coefficient of 4. So in order to get rid of that 4, we have to do the inverse operation. So the inverse of multiplying by 4 is to divide by 4, which gives us 4 over 4, which is just 1. And so that cancels out so that we only have 1x on this side of the equation. But whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other side. So we have negative 20 divided by 4. Now we know a negative divided by a positive gives me a negative answer. And 20 divided by 4 is 5. So my answer here is negative 5 equals x, or x equals negative 5. It doesn't matter what side of the equation they are on. So now I can verify, check my answer. I start with my original equation, and instead of an x, I'm going to substitute in a negative 5. So everything else stays the exact same, but instead of an x in brackets, I'm going to put a negative 5. So this is negative 20 equals 4 times negative 5. Is that true? 4 times the negative 5 is negative 20, right? So we know that our answer, x equals negative 5, is correct, because it satisfies this equation and makes it true. All right, let's try some with the opposite operation. We'll start off where x is being divided. So x is being divided by 7, and it equals 3. So if x is being divided by 7 and we want to get rid of that 7, we need to do the opposite operation, or the inverse operation. So the inverse of dividing by 7 is to times by 7. Actually, instead of using a Instead of using a multiplication sign, that can get confusing with the x's, so I'm going to use a dot. So I'm going to say multiplied by 7. Okay, so again, it's like we have a 7 over 7 here, which is just 1. Those cancel out, leaving us with only an x. But if we multiply one side by 7, we also need to multiply the other side by 7. So 3 times 7 is 21. So now we have an isolated variable and we have our value. So we can verify by taking my original equation and substituting in 21 in place of x. So instead of x, we'll say 21 over 7 equals 3. Is this true? 21 divided by 7? Yes, it is equal to 3. So we know that that answer is correct. Okay, one more. All right, we have an x divided by a negative 6 equals a negative 6. So here I am dividing by a negative 6. I want to get rid of that divide by a negative 6 so that x is by itself. So we do the inverse. The inverse, or the opposite of dividing by negative 6, is to times by negative 6. So by timesing by negative 6, we get to cross those out because negative 6 over negative 6 is just 1. And we have to also times by negative 6 on this side. So we end up with x equals a negative times a negative gives me a positive. So we end up with a positive 36 for an answer. And we're going to see if that answer is correct. We take our original equation and we substitute in this 36 in place of the x. So we end up with 36 divided by a negative 6. We know a positive divided by a negative gives me a negative answer, negative 6. So my answer is negative 6 equals negative 6, and that works out. So we know that my answer is correct. All right, that is how you solve one-step equations involving multiplication and division.